Greetings all you movie junkies and entertainment lovers, and welcome to another top 10 video. If you're like me and you're a fan of both horror movies and science fiction movies, chances are you're a fan of the subgenre sci-fi horror movies. Now before we continue with this list, it's important to remember that this is just my personal list of top 10 favorite sci-fi horror movies. At number 10, we have Critters 2, The Main Course. I know there's always going to be at least one person who's only a fan of dead serious horror films that doesn't want to have anything to do with or hear anything about any kind of comedic horror movies, but you're just going to have to get used to it because I love all these different kinds of subgenres, and sometimes they all kind of mix together into something that's really wonderful. And that's what I think Critters 2 is, a really wonderful, silly, wacky, practical effects extravaganza. And of all of the Critters movies, Critters 2 is my favorite, but I do also really love the first film, and I think I pretty much like both Critters and Critters 2 almost equally. Honestly, one of those few sequels that to me actually is better than the original film. Then at number 9, we have the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Now of course, there's been a couple of different versions of Invasion of the Body Snatchers over the years, and a lot of people would probably put the 1978 remake above this. But for me personally, although I do prefer the ending of the 1978 remake, I actually ever so slightly prefer this film, even though I think they're pretty much on par with one another. When you watch this film, you can see so many seeds being planted for future sci-fi horror movies. Definitely, I would say, ahead of its time, especially for, 1956. It's a classic invasion film, but it was a different kind of invasion film from the other movies that were coming out at the time. And then at number 8, we have Event Horizon. When you watch it for the first time, maybe you might think it's going to be more something like Alien, and then it of course goes in that more psychological direction, and it is, to me, I think, a really wonderful different mix and mesh of different horror ideas. You've got sort of more stuff that's similar to Hellraiser, but stylistically and visually it feels much more like Alien. It has some wonderful practical effects, some great visual scares and elements to it, and when you watch it for the first time, you really don't know exactly where it's going to go and how far it's going to go and how far it's going to take you, the viewers. I think it's a really great movie. It's easily Paul W.S. Anderson's best film, in my opinion at least, the best science fiction horror movie of the 1990s. Then next up, we have Killer Klowns from Outer Space. This film, of course, was made by the Chiodo brothers, who are, of course, most famous for doing the effects of all of the Critters in the first two Critters movies. Of course, they also wrote and directed the movie in addition to doing all of the great effects for the clowns. This film is very much intentionally supposed to be very silly, very over the top, and very much a tribute to the old 50s science fiction invasion movies. Although this movie definitely leans a lot more into comedy, it does have some scare moments in it as well, and occasionally there's a couple moments in here where you remember that, oh right, these clowns are actually scary, and if you run into a dark alleyway and see them, you better start running because they are definitely still to be feared. And I think that's what's great about this movie, is that it is a absolutely very silly, tongue-in-cheek, cheesy movie, but they still did a good enough job of making these clowns scary, and just the imaginative practical effects and all of the different designs and shapes. Such a wonderfully unique, original, fun movie that to me definitely does not get talked about enough. Then at number 6, we have David Cronenberg's The Fly. One of those very few film remakes that actually is able to surpass the original film. And this movie is pretty much universally agreed to be better than the original movie. And I say that as somebody who really loves the original film. It takes everything that works so great about the original Fly and just updates it. And even when you watch this movie now, all of the elements that are so scary about it, that are so imaginative about it, that work so well about it, still work, I think, just as well now as when it did when it came out in 1986. You know, you like Seth Brundle, you like Jeff Goldblum, and you don't want to see him make this transformation. But at the same time, Jeff Goldblum's performance in this is so brilliant, and I think the fact that they did cast him in this and he is so, you know, such a likable character is what makes this movie so great and what makes it so tragic. And I think Gina Davis's performance as well, and their chemistry and their relationship, is what makes this one so memorable. And like I said, it's one of those very few film remakes that actually is able to surpass the original film. It's one of those all-time great practical effects horror movies of the 1980s. A lot of people, it would probably be their number one favorite sci-fi horror movie, but there was just a couple of other films that slightly beat it out for me. And then at number 5, we have the original Predator. All of these super macho guys at any other time anywhere else in the world would be feared by whatever they were going up against. Here we have them in a situation where we've got this creature, this predator from another world that is specifically hunting them. Just a wonderful mix of different ideas, of different genres, into something that is really original and really incredible. It is able to balance all of these different subgenres into one movie that is absolutely terrific, and it's easily one of Arnold Schwarzenegger's best movies and just one of my favorite sci-fi horror movies as well. At number 4, we have John Carpenter's They Live. Is like John Carpenter's own personal, tribute to movies like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, like It Came from Outer Space. It's also got its own modern context to it as well. Carpenter is able to keep all of that in the subtext, whilst being able to have it be just this really great original science fiction invasion horror film. It's very much like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where you know something's not right, but you don't know exactly what's going on. And once Roddy Piper gets those sunglasses and starts being able to see who is and isn't an alien, that's when the movie just kicks into high gear and it takes off, and it just does not let go from there. And of course, you've got the iconic fight scene with Keith David that every time you think it's about to end, it just keeps going. It's a fantastic film, one of my all-time favorites of Carpenter's, and one of my all-time favorite sci-fi horror movies. And at number 3, we have the original Alien. The quintessential sci-fi horror film to a lot of people is able to mix the two genres together so brilliantly. It comes to just, picking out top 10 favorite sci-fi horror movies. This, even though it's not number 1, immediately was the first film I thought of. Like, it really is kind of the poster child for science fiction horror. And I feel like so many of these other films just would not exist if it were not for the success of the original Alien. So it's easily one of my all-time favorites of the subgenre. Number 2, we have another Carpenter film, John Carpenter's The Thing. Another remake that is able to surpass the original film, because this technically is a remake of The Thing from Another World, even though you could argue it's actually a different interpretation of the same short story of Who Goes There. But the fact that it is called The Thing, and the fact that Carpenter was such a massive fan of the original film, I think you can kind of also argue that it is technically a remake of that as well. Alien is the quintessential sci-fi horror movie. I think there's a good argument to be made that The Thing is the ultimate sci-fi horror movie, but it's just kind of, different words. I mean, they're both fantastic movies at the end of the day. When it comes to, practical effects, boy oh boy is this the ultimate extravaganza of imagination and possibilities. So it's a phenomenal movie. It could have been number 1, but there was just one other film that slightly beat it out for me. Number 1 is Aliens. What makes it such a brilliant film and such an iconic movie and such a fantastic sequel is the fact that it does take all of those elements that work so well in Alien and is able to go even further with it, that to really take it to the next step and to make something that is just as iconic, an almost impossible feat for a sequel to be able to do that. But James Cameron managed to do that not just once but almost twice with a sequel to his own film with Terminator 2. Yes, it does have a lot more action than the first movie, but to me I just see that as, you know, a general natural progression of things from the first film, whereas the first movie was more self-contained, was only one alien and relied more on scares. Now we have multiple aliens. Now if this film was to have really leaned into the action much more and didn't have any scare elements to it, then yes, I think there's a good argument to be made that, you know, maybe the original film is much better, but it doesn't do that. It is able to retain all those elements to it, whilst also being able to take it to the next level, to make it a logical evolution of that first movie. And it's pretty much the perfect example of how to do a sequel right, of how to be respectful of the first film, but to also evolve things, take things in a new direction. It's just a fantastic movie, and as much as I love the original Alien, I think I will always personally slightly prefer Aliens, and it remains my favorite of the Alien franchise, as well as my all-time favorite sci-fi horror movie. Alright guys, there you go, that was my list of top 10 sci-fi horror movies. Please feel free to jump in the comments down below and let me know what your top 10 favorite sci-fi horror movies would be. So until next time, be sure to consume as much entertainment as humanly possible, and I will see you in the next video.